partners, universities, with the ambition to make research insights directly available to cope with these monumental changes that are going to play out, particularly in Delta regions, and the Eurodelta is definitely one of them. And the special focus lies obviously on the ideas of the next generation. So the students and young professionals are in the spotlight this week. We have over 30 collaborating universities, organizations, and institutes this week, so that's quite a lot, and almost 90 participating young professionals and students. My name is Paul Gerritsen. I'm director of the Delta Metropolis Association, think tank for metropolitan development in the Delta of the Euro lowlands. So we're very happy that we can help facilitating this together with a number of parties, and particularly this week has been made possible by the municipality of Amsterdam, The Hague, and the province of South Holland, and also by the cooperation between Matrix and Isocarb. So it's very nice that they're also represented today, and we will include them in the discussion later on. Maybe it's good to mention, please be aware that the session is being recorded and broadcasted live through YouTube. So you know what that means. If you don't want to be visible, you block your camera. Can even change your name if you want to, but so as that you know. We kicked off one day prior to the Eurovision Song Festival, and being hosted here in Rotterdam as well, we could say, and maybe this event can also become a reoccurring event, why not? And perhaps even taking place in different parts of the Eurodelta. Luxembourg, we heard on the first day, is not participating in the Eurovision Song Contest, but is participating in this event, and we're so happy, or maybe I should speak for myself. I'm really happy that Belgium made it to the next round yesterday in the Eurovision contest. Since the Netherlands, Germany, France, and even Great Britain have sort of a wild card roll in for the final. So let's see what kind of relationships we can see between what's happening on that podium and on this podium. Well, we've had 2 very good days, and we're starting to build a certain momentum, but we need your input. We did yesterday much better than the day before, but perhaps today we can do even more interaction, particularly in the second half of the forum. So please post your ideas and comments and questions in the chat, and we will try to include that in the conversation. And we've learned so much already, and maybe some highlights from my side. Erik Pasveer started by saying, actually in the first day on Monday, from the city of Amsterdam, we're only starting to learn what we're actually doing. So basically, we're starting this cooperation in the Eurodelta, but let's see where it's going. Let's find out together, and let's try to do something effective on this mega regional scale. But if it feels too big, make it small. How can we make small steps towards something bigger? Yesterday, Carola Heine, Christa Reich, and also Kobo Bassauma made us understand the importance of mapping, particularly in finding out what's the heart of the matter, but also in using the data that is available, the geodata that's available in an instrumental way, but also strategically by thinking how to address a certain issue on a political level. And we've learned it's not about space alone, of course, it's about connecting space, society, and culture. We've touched upon the issues of scale and also time scale, and the economy, and how that is changing, and also that is what kind of changes should we strive for, and what kind of logic is behind that change? We should be careful to include the in-between spaces and think about redistribution and also what is the importance of degrowth. So that's a lot already. A lot of things have passed, and today will not be less. Actually, it will probably be more. We have contributions from Robert Brussy, partner of Must in the office of Cologne, focusing on the agglomeration concept of Köln-Bonn. I'm very happy that Joachim de Klerk is here, architecture work from Brussels, showing a medley of work, but particularly also focusing on the question of how you can create a platform where different projects come together to create a bigger whole. So that would be very interesting to hear from him. And Halina Zarate and Christina Knauf from NVRDV are here as well. So I'm very happy that they're here to show some projects that they've been working on in the Eurodelta. And as I said, we will then include in the conversation in the panel Anna Peric, architect and urban planner, lecturer and postdoc fellow at ETH Zurich. And I believe she's calling in from the United States. So very happy that she can join and got up very early to join in the conversation, and she's board member of Isocar, so that's why she's on the table. And last but not least, Henk Bouwman, Secretary General of the Matrix, the Network for European Metropolitan Regions and Areas, will be joining in the conversation as well. But maybe it's good to first kick off with a small question to know who's actually in the room. So we've prepared, as always, a Mentimeter question. I think you by now all know how that works. Which sector of work are you representing today? So from what sector are you joining? What's your center of expertise in terms of your daily work? Let's see.
Does everyone have the code and link? It's in the chat box.
Oh yeah, but there's two different codes. I see. And the link is not working. Arjan is telling me.
1 second.
And the code on the screen doesn't work.
No,
okay. Now it is.
Okay. Everybody just follow the link and the code that has been put in the chat box. That one is working. I can see people's comments coming in already. I'll share that.
Well, Lankrita, since you're now in view, maybe you can show the results and
yes,
tell us something about
it. Is my screen visible? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I can see spatial planning, urbanism governance, architecture, urban planning, private sector, urban design and architecture. I think this is also a good division that people are mentioning, because we always have this kind of struggle that who is joining from the public side, who is the private side. I think it's good whoever mentioned this. Urban design, research and practice, that's also super important. Urban transformation master students, and I am hoping that a lot of the comments here are coming from students, because students and young professionals, because that's what the podium is all about. So a lot of them might not be mentioning a student, but from the sector that they are studying or working. Transport, logistics, engineering, urban design, research, public sector, railway transport, brokering by design.
Well, I can say that actually we're quite in a bubble here. I see maybe a little bit transport and infrastructure also represented, but a lot of architecture, spatial planning, urbanism. Well, let's see what that means for the conversation.
But also a lot of research, huh? The combination of research and practice, that's also super interesting, because yesterday we talked about research and today we'll be talking more about the practice dimension. So I think it's really interesting to get the discussion open the discussion now.
Okay. And we have a second question.
Yes. It's the same code for everybody, and now it should be open. 50311460. Yes.
And what's the question?
The question is, what is the biggest challenge of Eurodelta according to you? So from whichever sector you're joining in your work, in your studies, language, that's the first one. I agree. Administrative, narrative, political interest. Interesting. Boundaries, maybe whoever talked about boundaries, do you want to say something about it? What do you mean by boundaries? What is the struggle or what is the challenge?
I'm the one who put in boundaries.
You put in?
Well, I meant the administrative boundaries. That's the biggest challenge that we face, I guess, in the Eurodelta for cross-border collaboration and cooperation. So I hope we can have the discussion going today to see a little bit more how the projects have been taking place, overcoming these boundaries.
Somebody is saying too much focus on rail and mobility.
Okay. Well, it's interesting that language keeps being the most central one, and we can adhere to that because basically we're all trying our best in the language that's foreign to most of us. So that's interesting. It's also interesting to see that there's a lot of talk about boundaries, politics, cooperation, and not so much the big spatial challenges that we have. Maybe they're so multitude that they become too small to notice. But it's interesting to see that we think that administrative challenges are actually quite some challenges. So maybe we can pick up on that later on. Let's continue. Let's start off with the first contribution. We will just have 3 talks in a row, and then afterwards we will have some time for discussion. So it would be nice if we try to keep it a little bit within the given time limits, and we just go ahead with Robert Brussy talking about the agglomeration concept of Köln-Bonn. Robert, I hope you are there. I saw you already, I thought. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, I'm there. I will share my screen.
And a great map behind you, so you're showing us.
We love to make maps. Let's see. Okay, and so I can. It's always interesting to see if. Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you, Paul, and organization for giving this opportunity to talk a little bit about our practice in the Eurodelta. My name is Robert Brussy. I'm Dutch. I'm one of the founders of MAST, an office for urban planning and design based in Amsterdam and in Cologne. Since in 2012, I moved for personal reasons to Cologne, and then we also started the department of MAST there. We always had a fascination for this big scale of the Eurodelta, but because we now have the 2 offices on different spots in the Eurodelta, our office is also in its daily practice very actively involved in planning the Eurodelta. And I'm just going to give a short pitch about the kind of work we are dealing with. You see here a series of 3 maps that we produced for the SURE network, where you see different mega regions in the world. And the Eurodelta is one of these regions that is competing with other regions, mega regions in the world, and where the competition is very high. And therefore, we think it's very important to see how the cooperation in this Eurodelta can be strengthened. A few years ago, in 2015, we produced a map for the so-called Rhine-Ruhr corridor. On the left, you see, let's say, the Netherlands, and on the right, you see a part of North Rhine-Westphalia. And in this map, we mapped the different kind of developments and challenges that are taking place in this area. And what it shows is that you have, of course, the urbanized regions, and they are connected by a series of different corridors. And these corridors are facing a series of challenges that we also discussed in the so-called corridor conference that took place in 2018. We were asked to produce what they called a fact note for this conference. And in this fact note, a series of challenges and chances for the Eurodelta were being described. And maybe the most central issue is that, that we said that the cross-border connectivity and complementarity, because you have regions that are very complementary in this Eurodelta, is an important asset in the economic vitality and livability of this core European region. That's another issue I think we should stress, is that we should be aware that the Eurodelta is the core economic region of Europe. This is the place where most money is earned, where most people live, and where most innovation takes place. And this can only be strengthened if we also enhance the cooperation with the different parts within this region. But in order to do this, we need a strategic perspective that is borderless and that aligns the collaboration among the main public and private stakeholders. So I think what Alan-Greta just said, that make this this difference between, let's say, the private stakeholders and the main public is very important, and also how to see how we can connect them. There are a series of issues that this area has to deal with, which has to do with livability and environment and climate change, with multimodal infrastructure performance. We need integral strategies for urban planning and infrastructure planning. There are a lot of issues concerning infrastructure maintenance and logistic and freight if we want to strengthen this region. Just as an example, here you see a map that we produced for this fact note about the infrastructure with the expected bottlenecks in the coming years. And if you look well at this map, you see that the most bottlenecks are in, let's say, the most urbanized regions in the west of the Netherlands, to put it simple, in the region around Antwerp and Brussels, and in the corridor between Düsseldorf and Cologne. And these are the areas where, let's say, the transport is in conflict with regional and local transport, where there's a lot of pressure on the infrastructure. And where you also have the conflict between the need for infrastructure and mobility on the one side, and a big pressure on the urban development on the other side. And I think what we try to do as an office is also to transfer knowledge from one country to the other all the time. And for example, in the Netherlands, we were involved in a lot of so-called MEERT projects, which try to solve these infrastructure issues for the highways combined with spatial developments. And I think that's something we now, for example, we try also to introduce and to help people in North Rhine-Westphalia to implement this way of thinking and acting. But it's also a lot about regional planning. In the Netherlands, I think the Netherlands has a really good tradition in the field of regional planning, integral planning, in bringing people together in an informal way. And here you see an example of a map of the so-called gebiedsagendas in the Netherlands. And this is also something we now try to transfer to parts of Germany. A third issue is climate adaptation. I think we don't have to discuss about this. And in the Netherlands, especially, I think already even before it was called like this, we were dealing with a lot of issues in the field of water on different scales, on a regional scale, water issues along the big rivers, but also on a smaller scale in the cities. And our office in Cologne is producing and working on a lot of projects in this field. And we were surprised, actually, this knowledge we can also partly play back to our office in Amsterdam, where they apply it in the Dutch projects. So all the time you have this kind of knowledge transfer. All these issues come actually together in what Paul already introduced, the so-called agglomerationsconcept, the agglomeration concept for the region of Cologne and Bonn. In the region of Cologne and Bonn, about 3.6 million people are living there, and it's facing the kind of issues that I think most urbanized regions are facing: climate change, here especially energy change, because we still have a few very big brown coal mines here that are going to be closed, and a lot of pressure on the infrastructure. And the region Cologne-Bonn is an informal, let's say, constitution of different kinds of organizations. All the municipalities are part of this organization, but also private banks, the Chamber of Commerce, etc. And it's an organization that brings all these people together, maybe a way with what we do now on a big scale on the Eurodelta, but here in small, only for 3.6 million people. Where they try to enhance the cooperation between these municipalities and improve the cooperation. And one of the things they did is to organize an agglomeration concept. You can say it's a kind of regional concept for this area, and it was completely new for the people here. And the way they did this is that they invited four teams with different disciplines, so infrastructure planning, urban planning, and landscape. And these four teams were asked to produce a vision for this area. It was a long process. It was a process of about 3 years in total, where all the time people from the whole region were being invited and to discuss with these teams about their visions. In the end, all these visions were brought together, and from that, one vision for the region was being produced. And I think this kind of informal planning we know from the Netherlands, but maybe not on this scale already. And I think that is something maybe that we could play back again to our colleagues in the Netherlands. This is something that also could be adapted there, but also, of course, in other parts of the Eurodelta. One of the issues we proposed in our proposal for this agglomerations was the so-called triple densification. A densification strategy that not only focuses on densification of buildings, but also densification of mobility concepts, and also densification of green and blue structures. And this is an issue now that has been very strongly worked on in this region because we simply have very little room for new developments. We worked out this densification strategy for an area in Bonn. But because of this, let's say, this densification issue, we were also asked by the region Cologne-Bonn to go with 20 planners from the region to the Netherlands and visit there a lot of projects, talk with planners about densification strategies, and also to help them understand how densification can also come up with new or can produce new kind of qualities. And I think this interaction is maybe something what we'll also try to do in the Eurodelta. We as an office have a very small part in it and try to contribute there and bring our part to that. And that was my pitch for this moment, Paul.
Great. Thank you very much, Robert, for showing us this work, but also focusing on the idea of the knowledge transfer. How can we learn from each other in this field? Christa also mentioned the agglomerations concept and the magnitude in which this kind of vision arrived, the kind of processes that were there. It reminded me a lot by similar processes in the Ruhr area, for instance, where I think indeed we can definitely learn from the way it's dealt with in Germany, here in the Netherlands. So thank you very much. We will come back to you later, but maybe we immediately go to our next speaker, Joachim de Klerk. Are you there? I didn't see you. Yes, there you are. Great.
Yes, I am here.
Great to have you there. So the floor is yours.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Now I see you in a strange position, but okay. Thanks for the invitation. I will pick up the knowledge transfer part to give a kind of testimony on the experiment that took place over the past 3 years under the name of the Delta Atelier, where in fact the pooling of different and diverse capacities was seen and also proved to be an instrument to multiply change. What is the Delta Atelier? It's an environment where we actually said this Delta is interesting to draw maps of, and that would be the map I would show behind me, but I couldn't find the non-PowerPointed version to show behind me fast enough. But that's actually a map where we actually showed different practices. So from national governments to local initiatives, local initiators, citizens initiatives, design offices. We invited them in the framework of the Rotterdam Architecture Biennale, and you are here in Brussels in 2018 to join a common effort. And the common effort that we sketched was to hack the missing link, to say we see that we are doing a lot of experiments on the one hand, bottom left, but we don't succeed to mainstream them. On the top right, we see that we have a multitude and gradually more very ambitious goals and plans, but we don't succeed to organize them, their landing. And so the gap in between is really our main focus and struggle. And if we want to touch upon this gap, we will need to pool our capacities. Maybe that would help. First point I would like to make is that the observations we made is that the big challenges we are facing, if we want to answer them in a systemic way, we have to go upstream. We can't think in big transformations. We can't think in big answers to big problems. We actually see that each of the problems, the energy transition, the water challenge, the food transition, actually requires a multitude of transformations. If we look at the global map of water challenges, you hear I'm speaking from Brussels, the police passing by, not for me. The big water challenges at a global scale, if we want to deal with this at a global scale, there's of course a lot of action that is necessary in terms of climate agreements and so on. But finally, it boils down to the fact that we cannot solve it with one-off measures. And so the idea here envisioned for the Belgian coast to solve sea level rising, to answer sea level rising with the rising, building a little wall in front of the dike is actually not the approach we will have to take. If we look at the Eurodelta maps that the Association Delta Metropolis made in a collaboration with it on the future of the lowlands, then you see that the water challenges come from everywhere, and that if you look down into the regions such as, let's say, dealing with drought, problems such as North Brabant or the city region around Ghent, or you look at Brussels, which is actually a marshland that has been built completely and which continues to have more impermeability, while it actually wants to advocate for more impermeable or permeable surfaces to deal with the peak rain and climate adaptation, then we see that actually the main challenge is to go upstream. A big plan, a big agreement, a big deal about all of these subjects is really difficult. We see that it's also difficult to turn into action. We see here all the reports that are made from Brussels to the Netherlands. on the water challenges. And we actually see that finally it boils down to something completely different, not the plan making, but finding a way to mobilize coalitions on the ground. Here, an example that I will go into a little bit later, coalitions between farmers, nature conservationists, landscape developers, local municipalities. If they can come together around the project then and adapt simultaneously, then it works. Same example in Brussels. A lot of Brussels is not a mountainous city, but there we have some slopes. It means that if you have peak rain, that some streets, especially the lower lying streets, are really problematic. How can we make sure that in the fabric of Brussels, we build more capacity to infiltrate in every street? That means that you have to think of a completely different project. And that's really where the problem arises. The next big thing will be a lot of small things. And we are still structured in a way, governance-wise, but also as a practice of design. And we're educating the next designers even in the same way, which is the worst part of the story, to answer to questions that are given, mostly questions that are about big project, big design questions, while actually we know that we need to provoke a lot of small changes in many places. That's kind of a mind fuck. To use a very dirty word, I'm apologizing in the meantime, for our practice as a whole, but also for our political system as a whole. This requires a new wave of projects, capacities, and practices of transformation. That's a crucial one, with an example going to Chennai, and a very, let's say, it speaks for itself nearly. Chennai is at the coast. It's a city that has that is built because of the presence of water, of course. But it's, of course, if you take the section, you see that the fact that the water system is broken up by continuous urbanization means that people pump up the water out of the groundwater. The city sinks at the same time sea level rises. And then we hope that building a dike would solve everything at the same time. Chennai is the city where we see the trains driving in with drinkable water, while actually the city is flooded at the same time with brackish and dirty water. So we see that there's a real challenge. If you want to deal with these types of challenges, and I'm looking at the work that OOS has been developing with a big consortium within the Water as Leverage program, then you see that instead of thinking of a big plan, it's actually a strategy where they say we need to go back to the local communities. We need to find a way. If we look at the whole scheme of how the aquifer has been nurtured, we need to find a way to go back to the local culture, local communities, and find a way to mobilize again a connection between social and economic life and the water challenges. And so what they proposed is to reinterpret the typical reverse temples that actually harvest water in times of drought to capture it and make it available in other moments in time. They say we need to move to a system where we can structure 1,000 tanks for this city, 1,000 neighborhood communities that work together to solve this water challenge. So this requires a completely different practice. It's not about calculating by engineers and drawing big strategies for the whole city as a whole, but it's about finding a method to engage with local communities. It's more socio-anthropological urban design work than it is about being right in what you draw for the whole city at once. Third, we can incite and enable many local coalitions through transformation programs and communities of practice. We are building a practice, and now I'm diving deep into an example from Flanders. If you look at how companies locally, together with municipalities, need to work together, here an example of burenwater, so neighborhood water. They're trying to find a way to collaborate locally, to store the water, to reuse processed water from the industry, and so on. This cooperation is actually hindered by many rules and regulations, by the fact that the subsidies for dealing with water by the industry is a different subsidy scheme than the subsidy scheme for people in the farming industry dealing with water, and is a different logic than the local municipalities use to deal with the same water. And that's actually where our real problem lies. And so Water Landscape is an ambitious program, an experimental program, maybe better, where actually an attempt was made to form a supra-local coalition of different stakeholders that would enable, through a call for local coalitions, that would enable local coalitions to have a one-stop shop, you could say, to have one environment, one framework, and not 7 or 8 different types of governments where they have to ask whether their local project would make sense for each of these 8, where it would actually be multiplied. This call was actually an interesting experiment. 40 candidates were submitting a proposal, 40 local coalitions in Flanders, which is an incredibly small portion of Europe. These 14 were supported by expertise, by designers. They met each other, they started to be involved in a community of practice. And now, in fact, Water Landscape 2.0 was launched 2 days ago, where the double amount of support system and money was launched. An inspirational guide was made for this community of practice to triple in terms of size. In the meantime, the experimental projects on drought were also launched, on dehardening were also launched. And you could say that all in all, about 100 types of projects are being experimented with, and always guided by, on the one hand, a supra-local program team that is responsible for maintaining the mission and the goal, supporting local coalitions in all of these locations. And in fact, this mobilization of these local coalitions is really interesting, because suddenly from exceptional projects that are pilots, we move to transformation programs, but also governments are pushed to actually adapt their frameworks. And we're not yet there. We didn't cross the gap of the missing link, but still we're getting closer to one another. The integral water management of Flanders is now being rethought in light of this approach, building these coalitions, instead of allowing or thinking that water expertise would be the most important aspect of an integral water management. Fourth, and I'm going to the end, no transversal projects, coalitions and programs without pooling and connecting diverse insights and capacities. We are doing enormous efforts in many places, different stakeholders, local initiatives, supra-local entities, companies are testing how they have to deal with water. And one of the biggest problems is that if we want to accelerate transformation, then distributed or dispersed knowledge is our worst enemy. So we really need to find a way to collect knowledge. The biennial in Rotterdam, for example, in 2018, but in other editions as well, is an attempt to actually offer a podium, but also to structure the dispersed knowledge, to bring it together and to offer it as a more structured database or knowledge base or library. The same happened in a Brussels exhibition, but then also bringing stakeholders together. Here we see a session within the Delta Atelier in 2018, where the man standing up is Wiebe Oosterhoff from the municipality of Rotterdam, pitching the importance of urban maintenance, so not the design, but the maintenance of public spaces, sewage system, green spaces, and so on, and saying we should use this. It's 15 billion euros a year in the Netherlands that we are spending on maintaining our road and green infrastructure on a yearly basis. Can we use this for climate adaptation? Well, with this group, we wrote down what potential strategies could be. So bottom up, what is the next step? What do we know already? And what is the next step? And out of this came a Delta Atelier experimental track on urban maintenance, where in fact, the possibilities, the challenges, the next steps were unraveled, and that influenced, together with the work done in Amsterdam and the work commissioned by the National Ministry, BZK, led to the city deal Beheer van Openbare Ruimte, where a next community of practice is being set up. And I can give this example also for other subjects. The protests in school streets against bad air quality and a mobility system was picked up in a designerly session to see how we can actually make new types of proposals. My conclusion, fifth point, to multiply the transformation of our Delta, we really need the intermediate societal platforms and incubators, not next to or against the system that is in place, but as an aid, as an enabling environment for the different authorities, capacities, energies that we can find both in existing silos and on the field. We need a form of a platform logic. This Delta, which is in the midst of enormous challenges, the SDGs or whatever other supra or meta framework you can use, and at the same time is full of initiative in many places. How can we transform this Delta not only via the drawing of or the making of big agreements, so minister presidents meeting every 2 years and agreeing on what is important and how it should happen, but also mobilizing the capacities of very different stakeholders. The Delta Atelier was a peer-to-peer action and knowledge platform that was tested as an experiment since 2018. And if we look back, we see that this group of practices, first it grew. From the first 50 practices, we are nearly going towards 150 practices involved in different trajectories. We see that it's a form of multiplier. So when you bring people together to set a common agenda, it starts to launch trajectories, such as the city deal public space, and in Belgium, a street deal on how to deal with other things, next to some things on other subjects. And if we look at the experiments, we see that the qualities, that's actually a looking back publication we're trying to finish now. We see a number of experimental dimensions. First, we need mobilizing narratives that can mobilize very different stakeholders, from within governments to local stakeholders. Second, it's a kind of chamber of practice. It's a kind of room where practices are not waiting for others to commission them, but where practices on the basis of their experience can help define what the next step is and start to be entrepreneurial. Practices from within government again, and from the educational research and other participants that are here today. Third, build a shared agenda. So come together, define what the next steps are. Fourth, use imagination, culture, and design to actually provoke. So it's not about waiting for the question to come, it's provoking new coalitions, new trajectories. It's being entrepreneurial about it. And the what if power of design and imagination is crucial to that, because it's about envisioning what could be possible. It's about also facilitating these types of environment. It's not a neutral environment. You don't come there and you can do whatever you want. It's also a thing that needs to be moderated, facilitated, edited, so that actually it starts to make sense and steps are being made. Explorations are made along topics such as management, and it forms a kind of incubator of trajectories that finally lead to spin-offs and things that go out. So you bring expertise in this room and it goes out in the other hand. And that's maybe a way, an experiment where this delta, more than a map and more than a physical system, it's also a kind of system of knowledge transfer, which we have to structure much better. And if we can structure it much better, it actually produces new types of coalitions on the ground and new types of coalitions in a transnational way to actually develop the capacities and the practices we need to develop further. We are trying to take this one step further with a project develop a similar type of learning environment, online library of strategies, and an incubator for new type of investment programs. With the Great Transformation 2020-2030, which we're launching tomorrow night, where we actually took it one step further, building on all the knowledge that is there. We said, in fact, we know what we need to realize. The only question is how. We need more food parks for local and biological food production. We need in the mobility system, we need new flow collectors. We need to build climate streets and energy districts. And in fact, we can actually start we can reverse the logic completely, start from what we have to do and bring everyone maybe together around this so that we can find together the ways to do this. And in fact, by pooling these capacities, we sensed during the experience of the Delta Atelier that this is a method to actually multiply change. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for taking the time last year of rethinking everything and distilling and making clear what you've been doing in this experiment. So that helps a lot. So thank you very much. It's very interesting that you're also kicking off with this next step. So I hope we can tap into that with whole group also participating now and see how we can contribute. So thank you for now. Perhaps you can stay around a little bit to still answer some questions, but for now I would like to continue with the last presentation. From MVRDV, Halina and Christina are joining. I see that you're both in the same screen.
Yes. Hi, everybody. We're trying to keep a distance, so you will see half our faces.
Yes, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. We will share the presentation and my colleague Halina will kick it off. 1 second. You see the full screen right now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thanks for the introduction. I'm here with Christina, as you know, associate here at MVRDV, and we will share with you a few of our visions and a bit about our practice here in MVRDV with beyond border collaborations. So this ties very much into what Robert was talking about the borderless strategic perspective. And the idea that we want to bring today is how that can work in 3 different scales. So we bring examples of the international scale or of collaboration, also the regional scale within the same nation, and the city scale, which is a little bit more local. So we want to start with Luxembourg in transition. This is a competition that we are currently doing. We are on phase 2 of 3 of this process. And it was an invitation to think about how can Luxembourg and the functional area around it, the other countries that are also around it, can actually achieve a zero carbon reality and resilient to climate change by 2050. So with that in hand, we started from an approach that is very much centered in the notion that there are certain regimes or practices that you have to stop doing and actually phase out, and certain emerging initiatives that actually need to be empowered to become the new regime that are more sustainable. But for you to actually achieve that, the first thing that needs to happen for that transition is that communication, or how we had like on the word cloud, the language, the dialogue, right? And that has to happen across borders and across levels. And here we show like the different levels of collaboration, like the municipalities that compose the functional area, which is pretty much an abstract area, not necessarily an administrative area. And then the greater region, which is the actual administrative area, boundary of this whole place, this whole dynamics. And of course, Europe and the world, which feel also the effect of whatever decisions and practices we have. So for taking this cross-border challenge in hand, we looked into 5 themes: energy, water, mobility, and waste. But our idea was to broaden the research question beyond zero carbon and beyond each of these themes individually, and start crossing the disciplines and bringing everything together into the map, if you will, or into the space. Because this is a classic example of why we shouldn't look into only one theme or only one country. For instance, Luxembourg, with its functional area, it generates a lot of mobility, a lot of commuting across the borders. But even if you turn all of these cars into electric, you are emitting zero carbon, but you're still trapped on a traffic jam. So what is the benefit of that change, of that transition for people's lives, and how can you actually bring that as a contribution for other themes? So for instance, water, in this whole region, there are 2 big basins, and water is being brought from basically one spot 50 kilometers away from the point where water is actually being consumed, which is a really long distance for you to transport it. And that also reflects the fact that if you are sealing the soil on the area that is, for instance, within Luxembourg, the flooding and the effects of that soil sealing will be felt in Germany or in France, because this is the flood area risk that you have along the river course. And in the same time, like if you establish a relationship in which a big portion of your territory is producing meat and another portion that is far away is producing fruits and vegetables, you start creating the necessity of this exchange that is not resilient. For instance, with the COVID crisis and the corona challenges that we have been having, Luxembourg suffered a lot because with the collaboration across the borders, workers that harvest crops across the border every day couldn't come to actually make this production or to spin economy or even living in these areas. energy production. We're all talking about the energy transition, but the potential, it looks like in this map, if you look at the map on the right, you see a really intense red on the German part. This is clean energy potential. The wind is not so much different in the north of Luxembourg, but it's the governance, the priorities, the policy, the communication. How do you make everything within this territory actually work on the same way? As Joachim mentioned, you have to go upstream. You have to start looking for big solutions for these really big problems. So this is what we are trying to do with Luxembourg, like crisscross all the themes, look how and where in space do they coincide, and bring strategic interventions that are actually site specific, and start seeing how you can do small changes in the local, but like big changes on the really large scale. If you multiply them across the territory, how can you start creating an example and also knowledge that you can export to other cities, other systems that collaborate on the same in a similar way?
So the same idea of these integral plans that, as Joachim mentioned, how to have a larger scale vision, but then really to activate change in multiple ways on a local scale, is also applied in our competition entry for Resilient by Design in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a whole region we looked into. And actually in the first place, looking mostly into talking with the local communities about what are the issues in their place, what are current concerns, what are actually initiatives that are already existing. We're learning from actually the citizens living there, and also the authorities at the same time with the same group, you know, as a dialogue. Of course, we also had a look at the data and started to understand the interdependencies of different issues within the area, not just sea level rise, flooding, but also wildfires, evacuation issues, infrastructure, and mostly also the fragmented situation regarding policies and collaboration within this whole region, which is quite much worse, let's say, than maybe we are dealing with in Europe here and there. So that all these issues together, they sort of formed a downward spiral in this region. And after a lot of discussions with many stakeholders, we figured that one larger scale strategy could be to create more robust infrastructure networks in this area, to build resilience over time in a collaborative way. So, you know, having initiatives in all communities that all together work towards creating a network and a system that is much more stable in case of emergency or in case of changes than the current very fragile loop system that is in place. So for this larger regional network idea, we developed a prototype, which is consisting of what we call connectors that are streets or creeks that we would in an integral way design for new mobilities, for water buffers, to include amenities for the communities and so forth, that could connect the uphill communities with the Bay Area or the Bay Front actually. And these are combined with community spaces, public spaces that are adaptable, that can offer orientation in case of emergency, offer space for evacuation and emergency help. At the same time, buffer water, but also offer like orientation and community places for the people living in the areas on daily life basis, let's say. And this prototype idea, we then started to discuss with one specific community as a sort of a test case, which was South San Francisco. You see here up in the upper left corner the map. As the first starting point, we started to open a little pavilion where people could come and map, I don't know, historic events or places they like, they love, you know, or things where they thought, you know, adaptation could happen. And we started talking with schools and all kinds of community members. And in parallel also looked into digital tools to foster co-design, you know, to our design practice, for example, provide catalogs of initial ideas that were, you know, random maybe. And through a dialogue, we could figure out, is this a crazy idea or not? Which ones are actually founded or could be interesting for these communities. And then bit by bit, we could develop these designs together and also visualize in AR, for example, how it could look like in the future. And through this, we could actually customize this prototype with the community and make sure that through these local upgrades, these local interventions, bit by bit, the regional robust network could be built over time. And on the level of a single municipality, we wanted to share with you the example of our supervision in Eindhoven, where we actually work on the city center area, an existing, very important part of the city, of course. Here we collaborate with different departments of the municipality, making a vision for how to green the city, how to transform the public space in that, within that vision, and how to densify in an integral way the city center. So this integral vision consists of the idea to make the city center that you see on the left as a sort of a hinge between these landscapes that surround Eindhoven. It's sort of the missing link in this sense, like spatially in this case, to say, okay, this becomes part of the National Park of Eindhoven. And that means something, quite something for how the city would develop into this green park, basically, even in the center. And we also integrate a strategy on how densification can contribute to greening the city, to making and more active at the same time, and to change the monofunctionality of the city as it is, and also add interesting spaces for the city to grow, while fostering, for example, as well, water storage. And we communicate that in very simple ways. We have set up 10 basic principles, and the core is here on the left. As you see, there's a set of ideas and design guidelines that we developed together with the municipality that are now anchored in legal documents. So we give each initiative in the city a little leaflet of 1 A4 explaining these 10 ideas. And with this, we invite them to participate in exploring the ideas and making them more diverse. And at the same time, we also ask a contribution from each larger development to actually finance as well these upgrades that we are aiming at for green, for public space in the city. We do this through dialogue in ateliers. Every month we meet with whoever has ideas for the city and discuss them and help them to get them a step further to fit to this vision. And we also monitor the ideas through 3D tools and also sometimes ARs in public events to communicate and show what can happen and how the city can transform. And you already start to see examples like in built form, like on the left, some nice diverse architectures are in the city, and also the public spaces are being transformed with a lot of effort also from the municipality. And all this will hopefully contribute after a longer term towards making the city more resilient, the city center more green, but also offering water buffer, cooling, places to, places for leisure, places for biodiversity, and also jobs. So all together forms this integral vision for the city center that we build together with everybody in the city that has ideas and wants to transform the city. So with these 3 examples, we wanted to show you how we are actually, it was very nice, Joachim, this presentation, because we are actually working, I think, in the same spirit. We wanted to show you how we do this on several levels, several scales with stakeholders involved, and how we try to really get these smaller projects off the ground that actually add to overall transformation and change. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you very much.
We'll stop sharing. 1 second.
Yes, please do. Very interesting to hear from your recent experience at MVRDV. Very nice that you addressed this cross-border collaboration and the need for this. So particularly in the case of the Eurodelta, and finding new ways of working and also creating new structures out of that. I thought that was an interesting point you made for the San Francisco Bay Area, and I also got this this work of you from Manifesta.
Nice.
Very nice. The Grand Puzzle, which says the same actually. Like you're looking for ways how to combine all of this in creating new approaches. So so thank you very much. For now, Alankrita just texted me that she would like to intervene actually. So this is actually what all of you should be doing now. But Alankrita, of course, is the first to do it. Of course, she can. She's the master of ceremony actually of this whole thing. So there you go.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert, Joachim, Helena, and Christina for the presentation. It's super nice. I'm intervening here a little bit more from the participants' perspective. I'm not sure how many of the participants, the students from universities and the young professionals are joining today, because this was also more for a discussion of the viewers, practitioners, but I can see some of them are joining. So I just wanted to address a couple of points to them, because they will be starting to work on these visions from tomorrow. And all of your presentations are super interesting, and I think they can take a lot of inspiration from today and also from yesterday's presentations. So I think just a couple of points to focus for all the participants who are joining here, how all the visions are discussing or relating or addressing towards the European agendas or global agendas. So for example, some of you already mentioned about UN SDGs, the climate agreement, Green Deal, post-COVID strategies. So I think this is really an interesting dimension to look at. Several scales, how to work between several scales with different themes. We talked about inclusion, water, digitalization today, of course, everything combined with spatial planning. Crossing the borders, how we are crossing the borders with the bigger visions from planning perspective of Robert that showed the agglomeration concept from Cologne and Bonn. The Luxembourg was a really interesting example at a bit smaller scale, but more design oriented, spatial design. But also the smaller initiatives, how you can put it into a platform that Joachim presented. I think these are super interesting. And just to give you a heads up, we are trying to do the same through this Eurodelta knowledge platform with all of your participation, the visions that you will be creating. This is the first step that we are planning to introduce in the website, in the platform, and we take it further with more discussions with different practitioners and researchers over coming years. So this is the first step. Take as much as enthusiasm and efforts towards it, make more efforts and ask more questions to the panel today. So we move to the next part now, and I just want to again give a push to all the participants to ask more questions so that you have more ideas for your team to work with tomorrow. Thank you, Paul. That's all from my side.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's particularly directed to the young professionals and students that need to work together tomorrow. Maybe we can spotlight everyone at once, or at least from the speakers. And I would like to introduce the two panel members joining in the conversation that I already introduced in the beginning. I'm very happy to welcome, especially at this hour. If I'm right, Anna Peric, are you in the United States? Is that correct?
Exactly. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul, for notifying this. Yeah, it's 6 a.m. now.
Yeah, so
in Chicago. Yeah.
A big thank you for joining in so early.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so very good to have you here, also from all of your different experiences, but particularly from your role in the board of Isocarp. And I would also like to invite Henk Bouwman, Secretary General of Matrix. Is he here? I saw him in the chat. Yes, he's here. So perhaps we can.
I tried to add everybody in the. Is it not visible for everyone?
No.
I tried to do the multi-pin.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Now it's going better. Great.
Here it is 1 p.m. in the afternoon, which is of course a terrible time to intervene because it's lunch hour, and in France lunch hour is sacred.
It's sacred.
So I bear it to Anna. 6
So
a.m.
that's a point about culture for sure. And there's not many questions actually. This is a pity. So please, from everyone, I think it would be very nice to have some questions and ideas from you to include in this conversation. But maybe to start off with this, I saw Henk reacting to the talk of Joachim particularly. I think you feel very much addressed. So I want to start with Anna actually. How do you look at the analysis that Joachim made for his own work, basically his own struggle, you could say, and come up with a way of looking at it, and that taking that as a first step to a next level. From your experience of Isocarp internationally, how do you read this view?
Mm-hmm. So thanks a lot for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure to actually intervene in this area. So I have knowledge and experience in different kind of approaches that were actually mentioned today. So particularly test planning by Robert, that were mentioned by Robert, and these co-design approaches that actually Joachim mentioned, and yeah, the colleagues from MV, it was a more design approach, which I'm also familiar with because I have architectural background. So it was a real pleasure actually to listen to all of this, and this idea for making this open for next generation, for our future professionals is a great one. So I'm also greatly supporting it coming from academia. But actually, I want to address something that Alankrita just summed up previously. So how all this refer to some of the European norms. So if we are looking to some of the larger scale. So, okay, first here we need to look at all these European Commission documents, etc. And the new territorial agenda 2030 is certainly promoting the place-based approach. And so I think this is something that should be taken as a main lesson after all these presentations that I have been attending previous days and today. So this is the key message for students. So of course it is the basic principle, it is so comprehensive. So we then need to see how we are going to deal with it at the ground. And Joachim and Robert and colleagues, architects really show it greatly how it can be done. So this is something which is the general message that I think I can take from this. And speaking about the place-based approach, also referring to the issues that we heard yesterday, it is important not only to speak about the space or place, how we are making place. It is important to speak about the society, so meaning the people, so not only institutions, but really the people, and the culture. So I like it very much yesterday, the input from Carola, who was actually speaking about the culture. So not only culture in general, but maybe when we zoom up into our own field here of urban and spatial planners and architects. So what does that mean to speak about different planning cultures in the region of Eurodelta? So to think, is it difficult or maybe not that difficult to achieve? We saw that language perspective, language bottleneck can be one issue that we can address. But more, I think I have experience from some other macro regions in Europe. For example, I have been working on a corridor Hamburg-Athens. So you can imagine how many differences you have in there. So at least I would say that Eurodelta is a region where we can, as Robert said, actually, Robert highlighted greatly. So what is about the social, political, and economic circumstances there? So yes, it's the one of the most competitive, most innovative, the most richest region in Europe. And we can all build upon this, actually, when we speak. And the last issue, the last actually keyword, which is important for me in this narrative, is the issue of governance. And here, particularly, I'm not addressing the institution. I'm not addressing the institutional governmental framework. Yeah, but we are talking about the governance. So this is what Joachim and Robert have been talking about. So this is about engaging the citizens, building up on the local knowledge, using this local knowledge, concentrating it, so not dispersing, making different kinds of coalitions, communities, or practices, but on the ground. So with this, actually, I think I can close this circle from this place-based approach to the way how we are going to implement it through these locally based strategies, which actually understands the specificities of space and local cultures.
Yeah, so basically you say it's very important that we do this work right now, which is very nice to hear from you. It's a big support also for all of the students working tomorrow and the day after. And I think it's very interesting that you raise this European agenda. I definitely sense a shift in the way the agenda is formed, and that should be taken as a good reason to continue with this mission and coming up with next steps. Also mentioned was the fact of this different types of collaboration, so the different fields of expertise that need to come together. I'm curious what Henk thinks about that, because since we all agree to that, this is so hard to achieve. We see today as a prime example, perhaps, of such a thing. We speak about multidisciplinary approaches within actually a group which is very homogeneous, and a group which, of course, finds very big differences amongst each other. But for the rest of the world, we're all talking exactly the same kind of language. So I'm curious how you look at that, also from your experience in Matrix. Is there areas where they do better in that, or is this a problem that we see everywhere in Europe, and how can we cope with that? And then I will go into a couple of questions that have been raised in the chat, perhaps also including some of the speakers. So, Henk.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Happy to be here, and fantastic that you have organized, let's say that the Delta Metropole is organizing this great initiative, because you know, the next generation is more or less there. In 10 years' time, at least, I think I will be gone. I don't know, but anyways, I think it's super important to prepare people to really, let's say, address the super big challenges that we are facing. I think when it comes to these communities, I think in general people tend to meet up with friends who agree with each other. So we all agree with each other. And it's, of course, not very nice to talk to people who don't agree with us, so we tend not to meet them. So I think in that sense, we see initiatives of this sort of so-called multidisciplinary approaches. But I think I would a little bit like to focus on another angle, which I think was also introduced by Joachim and in a way also emphasized by Anna. And that is referring to a project that I was in a final meeting for yesterday, and that's the ESPON Imagine project, that is looking at imaginaries in the Milano-Bologna macro region. It is more or less, it's very similar to the Eurodelta region in a way that it is organized along the River Po. It is a big region, more or less very densely populated. But the interesting thing is that it is, of course, a much more a make economy in comparison with the Eurodelta, which is maybe looking much more at trade. The interesting thing there is that they started talking about, let's say, all kind of formal shapes you can think of, you know, to make, to gather people, to gather disciplines around this kind of ideas, this kind of initiatives. But in the end, and that was, of course, the focus of this study. It was led by the Milano Politecnico, University of Milano. They, let's say, focused on the imaginaries, and that is rather how people perceive, let's say, an area, what we talk about. So we can talk about a macro region, Eurodelta, but I think for many people, and especially when you come from Rotterdam, the Eurodelta is actually a sea container terminal. That's, you know, that's the title of that terminal, and that is how people often perceive things. You can wonder if people in Luxembourg or maybe even in Lille see it as Eurodelta. Of course, they are all, you know, part of that river delta, but that is something which is almost wiped away, I think, by maybe it started with Napoleon drawing these national borders on the map and saying, you know, you are Germany and you are Netherlands and you are Belgium. So we are coming from let's say an area from a situation where we are still where we have to sort of cultivated differences, and whether you talk about multidisciplinary approaches, but also I think in terms of how communities in this area perceive things can be very different because of their cultural background, and sometimes that is cultivated. And I think what Joachim showed brilliantly in this, I think it came along with Beek Boer Bodem, that project. It is when you start from the other side. So when you start with communities and discussing with them how they perceive an area, how they perceive, for instance, benefits from a much better transportation, mobility, connections, but also when they see the benefits from sharing, for instance, educational programs. So, you know, where to raise your children and how to raise your children, creating the best conditions. I think that could make people think much more about a wider area than their own area. And I think that is a very important step in this process, because when you talk to politicians, they talk about their constituencies, they talk about their voters, they talk about, you know, what they are doing in their cities. I've organized many study visits with politicians, and they are always surprised what they see in their neighboring cities, because they've never been there, never saw it, never discussed it, which is amazing. It's just the other right around the corner. So when people start thinking about, let's say, things that scale up to a regional or macro-regional level, and when they start maybe even complaining about it, but also seeing benefits from it and discussing that with their politicians, I think that could be an interesting entry, which I also felt a bit like in the story from Joachim de Klerk. You know, this Beek Boer Bodem, it is very much about showing people, let's say, what benefits can be to collaborate, and then, let's say, go to the next level. I think, what is it, in the chat I saw that Frank de Hond raised this question now, is the EU afraid of the macro region or the Eurodelta? I think they're not afraid at all. I think they're very much in favor of these regional approaches, much more than we had in the last commission. To be honest, I think national governments, and sometimes also, let's say, local, you know, talk about provinces or this kind of authority institutions, are much more afraid of this, because they simply don't know, and they still think that they cannot talk about these things because their voters don't like it. And I think to sort of change the story to these imaginaries, to think about how people can perceive, let's say, issues, and that is, I think, a bit showed also in the Luxembourg in the MVDRV approaches. I think that is a very good way forward. So thinking from the bottom, let's say, thinking also how people can benefit, let's say, from this kind of level of discussions, I think is very important. And finally, when it comes to the EU politics, let's say the EU Commission, there is, of course, a huge European resource at the moment available. It's 1,800 billion euros, you know, the Recovery Fund and the Green Deal funds. When you look at that, they give very strict conditions. So, for instance, the Resilience and Recovery Facility, they say 37% of your application proposal should focus on climate investment and reforms. At least 20% of your application for funding should focus on the digital transition. So I think also, you know, talking, let's say, with the people who are now, tomorrow or today, already start with making these plans or visions, I think we should also see a way to better link up with the EU policies, because there are fantastic opportunities. But to be honest, I think in many ways the national governments are in the way.
Yeah, well, it's good that you mention this, and it's an advice to strengthen this cooperation on another level, also in terms of investments, because particularly in the Netherlands, of course, I think you all know we are too stupid to even come up with a plan for this recovery fund at the moment. So I'm actually quite mad about that, to be honest.
Actually, they come up with plans, but they don't talk with local authorities. They don't talk with communities. But they spend a lot of money on KLM, which was apparently was raised today is illegal. But anyway,
so that brings me to another point, and I want to include also the speakers. Perhaps someone can help me with adding some spotlights, because basically, Joachim, I think it's interesting. Anton Young, perhaps he can also come in, raise the question, which I thought was interesting, because it addresses this issue of actually doing more not anymore. Huh? Like things we should leave behind, we should stop doing, like phasing out. How do we manage phasing out things? You're focused a lot on coming up with new ideas. How do you look at this advice or question that Anton was raising? Perhaps you're there. Maybe Anton, you can come in as well. Let's see where you are. There's too many spotlights on probably now. Now it's there you are. I think I found you. Yes. Maybe you can reiterate your question if you want to.
Yeah, thank you. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I basically thought with the graphic about the transition curve, there's a lot of gain with the green transition, but there's also a big arrow going in and then only a small arrow coming out. So I thought this should also be like regarded, especially how the relationship between these two transition is, and also how if we don't really look at this phasing out, it could potentially hinder the growth that we could see. So how to deal with it? Is it just a political thing, or is it also that we can somehow solve it or help to solve it with spatial development? Yeah, this was my question.
Great, thank you very much. Joachim, do you want to reflect on that?
Yes, with pleasure. It's a really good question, because I think the observation we first made with this missing link diagram is that the transition scheme that was often drawn, namely, the more you start experimenting in many locations, the more the snowballing effect will start by itself. Well, no. So there is so many hindrances to multiplying best practices that I'm often questioning whether gathering best practices is even meaningful still. I'm polemicizing a little bit, but I'm actually sick of the best practice collection approach. It doesn't really work because they show the exceptions to the rule. We need to change the rule. But then the question is, how do you do that? And then another observation from the other vantage point is that our political system has a really hard time to make bold decisions or to take bold decisions on the basis of expert knowledge. What this means is that we know many things since a long time and we know them better and better, but still I think that the distance to making bold decisions is growing rather than being reduced. I can give an example. We know since a long time that it would be really good to move to another mobility system. We did studies in the province of South Holland and studies, we work together with the province of South Holland because otherwise we wouldn't know anything. We don't do anything alone. So if I say we, then it's not us as an organization, but it's us in collaborations. And also in Belgium, but yeah, it's really hard to make these bold decisions. It's the opposite is happening. We are allowing for more freedom. We are afraid of the voters to make bold decisions. And that makes it really hard. So then the question is, between those two observations, best practices that remain the exceptions to the rule, difficult. Bold decisions that are really necessary, that could build a new framework and could help phase out things, also very difficult. So then the question is, the only logic I see is a form of snowballing, where we try to structure, I think there's a lot of work to be done where we need to invent ways of working so it's not one thing, it's not one recipe, but can we find a way to multiply to make sure that more people are already on the ground and are asking in a nearly electoral way? That's actually why is water landscape with Beekboer Bodem that Henk mentioned? How does it work? Well, it's in many municipalities. It involves many local authorities. They are from very different political parties. So hence it pops up to the national system or the regional system, and it's being followed. So I think that's the only thing. And of course, then you need a learning environment. And in the learning environment, you need people like Hans Leinfelder in Belgium and others, people saying, Now it's enough, all this experimentation. Now instead of one experiment, we have 40, but we still didn't change the rule. So then this point of view starts to become very forceful, because you see that there is a kind of, you could say, an electoral college that is being made on the ground, that is maybe making it possible for politicians to say we can tilt in steps, but we can tilt. And it's happening now with, for example, electrical cars in Belgium. Very stupid decision if you take the point of view of we need to do everything now, then you can say, oh, it's only one small step. We will now move to an aberrant fiscal system where we stimulate the fact that people are not paid with money but paid with cars. But we now decided that they have to be electrical cars from 2026 onwards. Is that a good decision? Very difficult to say. Is it a step? Yeah, for sure. But I think it's a step in phasing out something. So I see the more we multiply, the more we can also phase things out. And then at a certain moment, these lines should cross. But that's a really hopeful, one of the mottos I really like is Gramsci, the pessimism of the intellect combined with the optimism of will. And so I'm really pessimistic so that I can be really optimistic But
it is the approach you explain. It's very much what actually the EU Commission, and especially Frans Timmermans, so the EU Commissioner, and more or less the father of the Green Deal policies, is advocating. So he doesn't give, let's say, a direction or a solution, or say, you know, this is what you have to do. But he says this is a budget, and you need to think about transition. And transition means that indeed you also have to phase out things and you have to phase in things. So it is much more that process. And I think I agree very much with you. I think on a local or maybe even national political level, it's very difficult, because they tend to sort of follow the sort of, well, what they think is mainstream. If you look at let's say, other industries, you know, you look at Elon Musk, idiots like that. I mean, how can he make us buy cars that are not even on the market yet? But we already buy them, because apparently he has a very convincing story. And I think that narrative, that developing that narrative, and also really listen to what people sort of are worried about. You know, do I have to sell my car today because I have a diesel, and do I have to buy an electric car tomorrow? No, of course not. But it's a sort of, you know, we tend not to listen, I think, to a lot of these communities, and I think that is really a big gap, and that is where this Imagine project, for me, we were observer there only, but it is a fascinating project, because it was the first time I saw sort of structured, let's say, study on how industries, for instance, are looking at things. So in Italy, you know, the make industry, also food industries, how are they looking at, for instance, international transport by train? You know, for them, it was a complete blank area. And after a year, they already start thinking, oh, there were actually quite interesting options there for us. So it is sort of showing opportunities, maybe, rather than saying, you know, than saying, you know, this is what you have to do. And I think the big Podium project also allows, I think, people to interpret what you want, let's say, what you want as a sort of objective, but you don't predict or you don't prescribe, let's say, the solution. You say, this is, you know, what we would like to reach. This is what you have in hands, and please find your own solutions.
If I can,
maybe
can I say one
maybe
thing?
you can react one thing, but we're running out of time. So I'm also wanting to give the others still some time to speak. So we will take 5 minutes more, but Joachim, you first react, and then I would like to go to Anna and then Robert, and then end up with Alina and Christina. So as that you know where we're going for. So Joachim, please first.
Very short, I think what we are discussing, and also taking up several remarks in the chat. I think the question is, if you think of the Eurodelta, how you position that. And so I think when it's an extra national-like organization and collaboration where negotiation is the core method, or where relatively top-down planning or negotiation about topics is the method, I'm really afraid that not only Europe will not be really interested, but especially the countries will be against. The more you see the Eurodelta as something that is enabling these different political levels to perform through a kind of knowledge and action platform, listening to the ground and connecting that to supra. So for me, the relaunch, the plans, the Green Deal and the ground are very close to one another. But many people in government are also very much in these philosophy, but they are individuals within systems. So how do we make spaces where these individuals can find the other individuals to collaborate with, so that we can actually connect, build corridors, you could say, between those local coalitions that know but not everything can be actually enabled to move, and these supra-local goals. And I think that's really if we allow the Green Deal to trickle down, or the from farm to fork strategy to land in national negotiations, then it's done, it's finished. It will be more of the same. It's this short circuiting that we need to learn how to do. And the Eurodelta could be a real instrument of short circuiting, in my view.
Yes, indeed. Great advice, but also your call to action. I think it's very, very clear that we should have that very prominently in the minds of the young professionals and students working tomorrow. That actually this is something that could create some sort of change. I'm there completely with you, also with hopelessness, actually, by the way, sometimes, Joachim. So Anna, maybe you could reflect a little bit, and I'm also curious after that of Robert's take on this, from particularly the German perspective, for which the Dutch always have a lot of ideas, like how they think. And maybe we're completely wrong. So, but first, Anna, please.
Yeah, just very briefly, we are definitely running out of time, but I would just reflect to what Joachim have mentioned. Indeed, what I have seen from my previous experience on different macro regions or mega regions or whatever we want to call it, indeed, this kind of networks, so informal networks, informal platforms are something that are considered the key in triggering the action in the area. So it's not going to come from the European Commission. It's not going to come from the national government, regional, state level, still so. So I think we really need this kind of bottom up, using the energy which is among the citizens, among the real people there who are actually feeling all these effects in spaces, in different places, so to say, while we are making them. And then we actually, what we need to do, so it was also the question from the audience, so do planners and architects, but more, I would say more spatial planners, urban planners, need to deal with politicians? Yes, of course. So it's the lesson for students. Yes, of course. So planning in the end is a political process. So not political in terms of time, now referring to some, when mentioned politics, politics can have different kind of connotations. But here we actually consider ourselves as a kind of facilitators, negotiators among different interests, different needs on the ground, and trying to transfer it to some upper levels. So first from local municipality to regional, and then addressing some upper scale. So I think with having said this, I think Robert can say something about this. I'm quite familiar with the test planning procedure, and I know how it functions. Actually, it was invented in Vienna, if you are reflecting, Robert, where it was invented in Vienna, and in so many cases it was implemented in Switzerland. So test planning is really considered a powerful collaborative tool. So I'm really looking forward to Robert to have a couple of words of saying how then to include these upper scales of government into this rather informal collaborative procedure.
Yes, great that you handed over to Robert. I'm also curious about this sort of conservatism that you might then encounter, and like, how do you cope with that, or do you cope with that, or is that evaporating in such a process?
You're asking a Dutchman living in Germany to give a reflection on Germany. I must say the place-based approach is, I think, very suited for Belgium and the Netherlands. And in Germany, they're just starting with this, and I think in that sense they're very interested in it. And I think the acclimationsconcept, what they did there is a kind of testing this place-based approach as well, by involving a lot of municipalities. So I think they're opening up for it, and that's one thing. However, what I still notice is things are very formal here. It's not only conservative; it's very formal. That has its reasons, but that's something that is really difficult to tackle. And I think the place-based approach and the bottom-up approach could help there, but it will take a long time here in Germany to implement it and to take the advantages from it. And I think here, let's say this exchange that was discussed here today could help. However, the second point I want to make, the place-based approach does not solve and tackle a few other very important issues for this Eurodelta. And that are especially issues which have to do with the big infrastructures, water infrastructures, transport infrastructures. And those are issues. I think also I think it was very good. MVDV showed the project of Luxembourg with the river system. Just to give one short example, if we talk about the river system that connects this whole Eurodelta, now in Germany, they've learned a lot from the Netherlands by creating and retaining much more water in the river, in the places around the Rhine. The consequence, however, is that in the Netherlands, we will be dealing with many more periods of low level of the Rhine. And I think this is, you can say, okay, great. We learned from each other, but the effect in a system is not always positive. And I think just one example. The second example is, of course, I think everybody knows it, is the freight transport of the Betuwe line. We built a beautiful structure in the Netherlands, and now they just started 2 years ago in Germany with making the new connection for the Betuwe line through Germany towards Switzerland, and they make it in a completely different system. I think these are huge issues which also are very important if we talk about climate adaptation, and which you cannot solve with a place-based approach. We didn't find a solution for it in the past 20 years, and we don't have it yet.
Great, thank you very much, Robert. So the last word goes to Halina and Christina, and I would particularly like to ask you to reflect on one of the questions that was in the chat in terms of how people react to your work from governmental side. Like, how does that work?
Maybe we both share our experiences, because we do work in different cultures. So with these projects, we also wanted to show that. Well, first off, I think we do work with a lot of municipalities, and they also contact us, because I think as designers we have quite a unique opportunity to stand between the chairs. You know, of course we do planning is political, but we have this luxury position of being able to ask weird questions. And to trigger people by asking the what ifs that might be questions that they usually are not dealing with within their, like professional realm. So I think in that sense, people react in different ways, sometimes surprised, sometimes of course a bit confronted. But ultimately, I think what we do is, like, I don't remember who said it, but we are becoming facilitators of processes as well. So we are really starting these dialogues with all kinds of different people, and we do position ourselves as outsiders sometimes, and sometimes that's actually a good position, because we can bring people together and also sort of moderate these reactions, and ultimately we always try to steer it into some vision or some direction that people can be proud of, almost, that they can look forward to saying, hey, yes, that could be a direction I can find myself in. And I think that's our power in this whole environment. And through this, we try to create also projects that in that sense, I totally understand Joachim when you say the best practices are a bit difficult, but we do also see that once we start these projects that might be based on a very strange question and come up with very strange solutions, and ultimately interesting solutions, they trigger also change in other communities, for example, because they make them see that actually it's possible to realize something that is that has not been thought of before, or that is maybe in between two different realms of political realities, like. So we try to get this sort of essence of people's needs, people's ideas out of this dialogue and transform it into projects that can actually be exemplary also and inspiring for other places. Of course, to do things differently, but they show it's possible to do something strange and beautiful,
Yeah.
In that sense, for us in our experience, transition or change or all of these big ideas that we're talking about, they are always structured by three pillars, right? Of three pillars of change, let's say, or focus that we should have, which is one would be the lifestyle, the people, the behavior, the bottom up. Another one is about the place itself, let's say administrative, but also about, I saw a question about the small towns and the big towns, the difference between dealing within these things. Well, we are also looking into decentralization and empowering smaller districts or smaller towns to work together in a strength, in a cluster or a hub. So how can actually
smaller but more multiple nodes can actually articulate a more balanced network for the region. And on the third realm or pillar, optimization, technology, innovation, and how Anna introduced herself was very interesting, because she said, we are on a very privileged socioeconomic and political situation within the Eurodelta, and we should not miss this opportunity because of bureaucracy or because of formality, but we should actually take that and leverage it to promote change now, if possible.
Maybe one last answer, because I saw in the chat also the question what we advise to younger like students or the younger generation. I think that's exactly the essence what Halina just pointed out, to stay, to leverage these opportunities and to try to find the weird questions to, you have to answer to leverage them.
Yes, well, I think all of you, what you just said is a great advice to this next generation. So be aware of this luxury position and particularly of the opportunities that the Eurodelta also provides. We're 15 minutes over time. That is way too much, but it says a lot about what we all have to discuss. Tomorrow and the day after, we will have way more time to discuss amongst each other. So I really hope that you will all take the benefit of all the contributions from today. So thank you very much, Joachim, Robert, Halina, Christina, and also Henk and Anna for joining in this conversation, and all of you attending. And I hope to see you all tomorrow and the day after. So, and I would really like to invite everyone who's sort of here as a viewer, as an onlooker, to also take the time on Friday to come to the closing meeting where we will have the pitches of the different ideas, and we can take it from there. Thank you very much.